Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, it is the final Michigan Monday podcast of the season. Well, unless Ohio State and Michigan play in the playoffs, and then we probably need to do another Michigan Monday podcast.
Probably.
So it's probably the last Michigan Monday podcast of the season. Tony, it has been quite a season, and we are headed into quite a final game of that regular season.
Well, it was quite a week to get to this Michigan-Ohio State week where Ohio State struggles and hangs on against Maryland. And, of course, Michigan struggles and hangs on. And more than hangs on, comes from behind to defeat Illinois 19-17. Michigan kicking 3 field goals in the fourth quarter, which means they are now officially a Big Ten West team.
There were a couple moments of that game that it was like they were down 6 points or something like that, and Jim Harbaugh is or 5 points, and they were taking their time going down the field, and it was like, you need a touchdown, right? You need a touchdown, right? Because you're not giving yourself much chance to get a touchdown, and it ended up working out okay, but it did not work out okay by all that much margin.
No, and they did trail 17-10 in the third quarter, and then it was like 17-13 there with under 5 minutes to go, and they finally kicked a field goal to make it a 1-point game, and then you got to still go back and get the ball, which they did. And so a heart of a champion type of thing. Like, this is one of those games where everybody you go through, and it's like it galvanizes everybody and it brings everybody together. The week before the big game, though, is it a letdown? Is it a galvanizer? It's in the eye of the beholder, perhaps.
Well, all of week 12 was like this wave, this tsunami of crappy football sweeping slowly across the country, and you had the noon games going on, and TCU is barely getting past Baylor, and Michigan's barely getting past Illinois, and all the people in 3:30 games are doing it couldn't be me, built different. And then their teams, fall into this morass. And then you have the Tennessee fans going, it couldn't be me, built different. And Tony, they sure were built different, because not just anyone can give up 63 points to South Carolina. And then you got into the late night games, and it was kind of the same thing. It was a little bit of survive and advance. And this is like, this is March, as they say. This is what it is. This is the time of year. It is survive and advance. And Ohio State and Michigan played in some ways very similar games, but they both survived and advanced. Mm-hmm. And now it's number 2 versus number 3 for maybe not all the Tostitos, but a good number of the Tostitos.
Yeah, it's interesting. We got to the Maryland game early on Saturday so that we could grab a table and watch as much Michigan as possible. I ended up watching pretty much the first half there, sitting there. Mm-hmm. And then going to our seating area in the press box, and then watching and the third and the fourth quarter. Tom's trying to get down to the field to shoot photos, and looking at the clock running in terms of, like, the game is starting. The Ohio State game is starting in 40 minutes, and 30 minutes, and 20 minutes. And Tom is still just like, you can't turn away, because you've got the Michigan-Illinois game going on. You've got TCU and Baylor, and you're watching one on the computer, one on the TV over here. And that's the best thing about college football Saturdays is that there's one, there's another, and you can't take your eyes off of either. And then it's like, finally, all of that drama is over. We can just get to Ohio State and Maryland and concentrate on this easy win and get to Michigan week. But it was a fun day yesterday.
It was a really fun day. I had thought, well, as soon as Michigan gets a 2-score lead on Illinois, which certainly will come sometime early in the third quarter, and they will, the defense that has shut people down in the third quarter in the second half all year will certainly do that again. So once they get up a couple scores and it's comfortable, I'll go down and shoot all the warm-up photos that I normally shoot and all that. And then, it's like there's 10 minutes left before the Ohio State game, and it's like, I'm probably being negligent in my duties at this point. I probably need to go down there. I went down, and by the time I got to the field, I was standing right next to where Maryland runs out, and then it was like, boom, they ran out. And I was like, oh, good, I'm right on time. But yeah, it was those were 2 games that were closer than expected, and the Ohio State game was as well. And it was interesting to me, looking back through my notes on the Michigan game, how similar it was, where Michigan just goes down the field, bing, bang, boom. Their big star offensive player, Blake Corum, makes a big play. They punch it in. It's 7-0. It's like, all right, well, I can see where this one's headed. And it was the same thing with Ohio State. Marvin Harrison makes a big play. Trevian Henderson makes a big play. All right, I can see where this one's headed. And turns out I was 0 for 2 on where those games were headed.
Well, you picked the right winners.
Yeah, which is all that matters this time of year.
Yeah. And you mentioned you just expect the third quarter for Michigan. That's where they dominate. I think they've given up 6 points all season long. In the third quarter, they gave up 14 to Illinois, which is what threw a wrench into everything. Is that Illinois went down and scored twice, and this is the same kind of first half Michigan has played over and over again this season. So I think everybody just expected third and fourth quarter to go as they generally do, where Illinois doesn't score anything and Michigan overwhelms everybody eventually, and that didn't happen. And Blake Corum goes down. We'll talk about that, but how much does Blake Corum go down? Keep Michigan's defense from stopping Illinois, because Illinois, and this is my first time really, really watching Illinois run the ball.
Yeah, Chase Brown
was really, really good, really tough to bring down, very direct and yet patient. There's some plays where he's just waiting, and he's like really, really patient, and then he gets and he goes, and they had trouble with him, 29 for 140, but only 4.8 yards per carry. That's a 37-yarder in there. So they contained him, but Illinois, that's Brett Bielema. Just Big Ten football. That's why he's really, really good for the Big Ten. He's really, really good in the Big Ten, but it's a different style in the Big Ten and the SEC. And I think Brett Bielema is an example of differences. You can succeed in the Big Ten doing it. You can't necessarily succeed in the SEC doing it.
Yeah, it's the old Billy Bean. My stuff doesn't work in the playoffs. Moneyball. That's kind of Brett Bielema. My stuff doesn't work in the SEC. But it is working just fine in Illinois and in the Big Ten because Chase Brown did not have a huge day. He's running for 4.8 yards per carry, which is that's kind of like the poor man's Blake Corum day, basically, where it's just a bunch of 4s and 5s, but you keep the chains moving. Illinois had more first downs than Michigan did, so that kind of style works fine. And looking forward in terms of the Ohio State game, we've talked for weeks about the fact that that's what Ohio State needs from its running backs. Yeah. That you don't need to have the guy who's going to go for, 1, 2, -1, 4, 68. You need the guy who can get you 4, 5, 6 yards and keep you on schedule. That seems like that. Michigan has that, assuming Blake Corum is healthy. That's what Ohio State needs from their backs this Saturday against Michigan.
I'm thinking if Ohio State gets 29 and 140 from an Ohio State running back, they're going to win, but they pretty much got that from Dallin Hayden, and they had to hold on for dear life against Maryland. So I don't know what to think about that now. That throws a wrench into things as well. But the Michigan defense, gives up some yards, but overall 17 points. Those are winning numbers. We were talking before, and I noticed Junior Colson, a linebacker, only had 6 tackles in this game. And if a running back is carrying the ball 29 times and my middle linebacker only has 6 tackles, I'm wondering why. That's an odd number, an even number, but an odd result. And a month or 4 or 5 weeks ago, I said Michigan has a linebacker problem. I think we saw some of that today, where it's just not as productive as you would hope. And Chase Brown just continued, and you get some. The tackles were spread out among everybody, which is good. But you would expect your designated tackler to be more involved.
Well, and I don't think Michigan is quite as linebacker-centric in terms of, is the lack of production for Michigan's linebackers on the whole, is that a function of the scheme of the defense not being, what we talk about with Jim Knowles and the Ohio State defense being spill and kill, where the defensive line is just there to sort of extend plays out and occupy the blockers and then let the linebackers rack up the big tackle numbers? Is that a function of the scheme of Michigan's defense, or is that really a concern about the productivity of Michigan's linebackers being able to make those plays?
Yeah, and I don't know their defensive scheme well enough, but they do have defense. Mazzie Smith had 5 or 6 tackles, and they get some tackles. Chris Jenkins had 4 or so, another defensive lineman. So there's that, but you've got safeties coming down because they played a lot of nickel yesterday against Illinois, and that may have also played into the 4.8 yards per carry, the 29 carries, and just the ability to move the ball. But ultimately, it worked because, again, if you hold somebody to 17 points and you lose, it's not your defense's fault.
Well, and, you look at the passing numbers from Tommy DeVito, and he was reasonably efficient, 21 for 30 for 178 yards. It's like that's fine, and you're, basically 6 yards per attempt on the nose, which is not great. it's not really even good. But the long of 18.
Yeah.
The long of 18, to me, says I take almost nothing from how Michigan defended Illinois in terms of how they're going to have to defend Ohio State. Because if you can't drive the ball down the field, then you can crash those safeties down and get them more involved in the run game. And I don't know. I don't expect Junior Colson to be the leading tackler against Ohio State, at least on run plays. Maybe he's more involved in the pass play, but I don't. I think they're going to have to defend Ohio State very differently than they did Illinois.
I know it sounds like we're critiquing and criticizing the Michigan defense that gave up 17 points when we just watched Ohio State give up 30 to Maryland, and I can hear that coming through the podcast. But I think when Michigan's offense is as stagnant, whatever you want to call it, as it is, you do start to have to criticize and critique the defense more, because every little thing, and we still talk about Chris Gamble getting beaten on an out and up against Lee Evans in 2003 because it wasn't the defense's fault. It was Ohio State's offense and a Jim Tressel conservative nature of, we're just going to do this, and one bad play can break you, and it almost broke the Michigan defense. But they go ahead.
Well, we're being critical of Michigan giving up 17 points. Here's the number of points Illinois has scored in their other games over the last month and a half: 9, 26, 26, 15, 24, and then 17. And you're basically giving up pretty much, give or take, an average day for the Illinois offense. And when we get to the, don't worry, we have plenty of criticism in store for the Ohio State defense that gave up 30 points to a Maryland a team that has not been putting up 30 points the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, it is still a very good defense. That was just not a tremendous. It was not. It was a fine day, and that is not. If Michigan, if they miss that last field goal and they lose that game 17-16, that's not on the defense. That's on the offense. The offense, to me, what that offense looks like without Blake Corum is a much bigger concern than anything else right now.
Yeah, and let's get into that, because Blake Corum still he went for, and I've got it right here, he went for 18 carries, 108 yards, 17 of those carries in the first half. And last week I asked, why does Blake Corum have like 18 carries or whatever in the first half against Nebraska? He had like 17 in the first half of this week. And then, of course, gets hit on the knee, goes down, fumbles immediately. And anytime you see as an injury is happening, the guy just dropped the ball, it's never a good sign. And that's what happened. He got hit on the knee. The ball comes free. Illinois recovers it. But, he leaves the game. Blake Corum leaves the game. Does not look good. Comes out to a rousing ovation at halftime. Actually played a couple of snaps, carried the ball once in the second half, and then was never seen from again. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how healthy he was even going into this game, because when C.J. Stokes is their number 3 guy, but Donovan Edwards, who knows how healthy he is, doesn't play. So C.J. Stokes getting the ball even in the first quarter, when that's not necessarily what they do. And so when Blake Corum is giving way to C.J. Stokes, and I know I just said, why is Blake Corum carrying the ball 17 times in the first half? And then C.J. Stokes is also playing in the first quarter and the second quarter. That's how much they're running the ball. Mm-hmm. And that's an issue we can talk about with J.J. McCarthy in a bit. Mm-hmm. But the load that has been put on Blake Corum, we've discussed it week after week. Does he need to be carrying the ball 27 times? Does he need to be carrying the ball 29 times? And 17 times in the first half, gets injured on his last carry. And, as you said, this Michigan offense is much different. It's not, I can't say it's not great with him. It's a different offense. They are a top 10 scoring team, so they're getting the job done. The dynamic issues that they're missing hasn't really stopped them from scoring. And we spent the last couple of weeks talking about the lack of big plays from Blake Corum, and boom, for like the first carry goes for 37. It's like, okay, all right, I'll stop.
You're welcome, Michigan fans. Yeah, I think when you saw what the offense looked like without Blake Corum, it was like, that's why he's running the ball 28 times against Nebraska. Okay, now I see. It is. We have talked about Ohio State's offense being the why don't they just build the whole plane out of Marvin Harrison Jr., and you can't really do that, especially with a wide receiver. Michigan's offense this year has really been the can't you just build the whole plane out of the Blake Corum, and they have really tried to do that. And when they have, That's why they've succeeded. It's because Blake Corum is hitting, he's moving the chains. They're hitting the occasional big one, against Penn State. They look great against Penn State because Blake Corum was moving the chains and Donovan Edwards was moving the chains. And then they hit the big, they each, I think, had a 60-yarder against Penn State, and it's bing, bang, boom. And now you're at 41 points, and it's a dominating performance instead of a 27 points. And when Donovan Edwards isn't playing, Blake Corum isn't playing, C.J. Stokes is, he's a true freshman.
Right.
He's had some ball security issues this year, but right now, he just looks like a very average running back. And they very clearly, you look at the usage pattern for him this year, throughout the year, he's put the ball on the ground enough that they don't totally trust him. And then behind him, it's Isaiah Gash, and it's just, it's fine, but you have for Michigan, C.J. Stokes, you had 11 carries, 36 yards, but he had a 17-yarder. So 10 carries for 19 yards, and then one 17-yarder. And Isaiah Gash, 3 carries, 6 yards. There's just, and these were guys that they had to play. These were, I think the thing that was most jarring to me, you saw Corum come out for the second half and he's riding the bike. It's like, okay, so this is not an ACL. This is, probably a knee sprain or some kind of, like you said, maybe an aggravation of a previous knee something or other. And it was like, okay, well, he's back out there. Obviously, it's not anything super serious. And he plays one drive and then he's out. And I think they said they took his helmet away on the broadcast. And this was a game where they were trailing. They were trailing in the fourth quarter. This was a season on the line moment, and they still didn't have him in there. He's obviously, this is not a season-ending injury, but that has to be a little concern that now you're going into the Ohio State game with Blake Corum's health kind of a question, Donovan Edwards' health kind of a question, and the funny thing is, we're having all of these same conversations about Ohio State. Mike Williams' health, kind of a question. Trevion Henderson's health, kind of a question. And then the third running back, just like Michigan, the third running back for Ohio State is a true freshman who has kind of been thrust into this role. And it is, these are two teams that are coming in both kind of banged up. And one of the things that makes this upcoming game so unpredictable is, okay, you tell me how healthy everyone is, and I'll tell you how I think the game's going to play out. But, Michigan, if Blake Corum can't go, or Blake Corum comes in and it's, like Chad Henne in the 2007 game where he's there, but he's obviously not right and really can't do anything, that game for Michigan looks very different than a Blake Corum who's at least 90% and can kind of get through it.
Yeah, they need Donovan Edwards back as well. And again, don't know his situation. But if you have an 80% Blake Corum and an 80% Donovan Edwards, that's better than a 140% CJ Stokes and Isaiah Gash and Tavier Dunlap, because there's a drop-off. And I think there's a drop-off from Blake Corum to Donovan Edwards. But I think Donovan Edwards is good enough to move the ball and do some things with. So they need those guys back. Let's talk about the passing game, Tom. The J.J. McCarthy, and I didn't chart anything, unfortunately. We're watching things live, and there's been no rewatch and meticulous things. I'm sure I'll do that for Michigan Monday, the written version. But some of the things that just stand out, like running the ball on 3rd and long several times, and to me that screams lack of trust, and not necessarily lack of trust that he's going to throw an interception or something, because he doesn't do that, but just lack of trust that you can pick up 8 yards on a pass play, and that to me is really, really jarring. And it's not the first time this year, and it probably won't be the last time, but how can you not trust your starting quarterback that went out and earned a job against Hawaii?
Yeah, it feels like, you watch that game and it was like, here was the stuff that was working for them in the pass game. Screens. Maybe some short crossers or something to the tight end. But that was it. And it was like, there was one play out of the end zone where Michigan was backed up in their own end zone, and they just threw a little screen to Corum, and it went for 41 yards. That was like 20% of his passing yards on the day. He finished 18 for 34, 208, no touchdowns, no picks. He didn't win them the game. He didn't lose them the game. But, I have for a lot of the year chalked up the lack of downfield passing to J.J. McCarthy, and I still don't think he's got great touch on that ball. It just, like, he has one speed. He throws, he hits the turbo button, and he throws at 150 miles an hour, and there's not a lot of touch on a lot of those passes. And when he has to throw it with some touch, he's throwing it over guys. He had someone open in the end zone at one point, or open
Colston Loveland.
Colston Loveland was open on one, and it was just, it was just like, looking at it, you would think, well, this is a very rudimentary pass for any D1 quarterback, and just not even close. But then he had a couple that were great. There was one to Andrel Anthony where he dropped a dime down between the corner and the safety. There were two guys there. He threw a perfect pass at the perfect moment, and Andrel Anthony just went clunk. And I mean, Ohio State's receivers have not been perfect the last few weeks. But, I mean, how confident are Michigan fans in their downfield passing game right now? Because it feels like we have seen Michigan try to establish this over and over and over again, because that has been where Ohio State has been vulnerable in pass defenses, down the field. And I have seen nothing so far that indicates to me that Michigan is poised to be able to take advantage of that. Now, we say that, and we are going to, hey, did you know Jabril Peppers has no career interceptions? We are going to Jabril Peppers this into existence by talking about it so much, where Jabril Peppers had no career interceptions, and Ohio State fans were gleefully reminding Michigan fans of this constantly. And then Jabril Peppers had his first career interception against Ohio State in 2016. So just rest assured, we are Jabril Peppersing this into existence. But, Michigan, just the inability to throw downfield and hit those big plays, that feels like something that, if they can't do that, that makes it easier for Ohio State to bring those safeties up, get a few, get an extra body in the box, and make life a little tougher for Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, C.J. Stokes, whoever it is.
Yeah, I think you have to force Michigan to do that. Don't assume that it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Set up to stop the run, and if Michigan does it, great. Good for them. But make them prove that they can before you assume that they will, or assume that they can. Don't take it for granted. Actually do take it for granted. Like, go ahead and do it if you think you can. It's more important for us to stop the run. And so you sell out, stop the run, and then if they complete that, great. But it's not like Michigan's offense has shown, like, now we're going to do it again. Mm-hmm. And not, like, you can give up a touchdown, I think, to Michigan, and then continue to do what you're doing anyway. Because if you stop the run, you're going to stop Michigan eventually. Because I don't think that J.J. McCarthy and the receivers, it's not just J.J. McCarthy. And his consistency is an issue. His downfield stuff is an issue. But that touch, like that pass to Colston Loveland, there was one defender between JJ and Loveland, and all he had to do was just toss it up, and he had a clear run into the end zone, and he just couldn't. And it's like a driver's test where you're like, well, you just need to parallel park, and you're like, no, I'm going to try to Tokyo drift into this spot, and you can't do it, and the ball goes 3 or 4 yards over his head, and that's JJ McCarthy. But he can do so many things, and we came into this season with so many expectations. And, Tom, it's time for me to bring back my theory and re-energize the thought process that the longer a quarterback is with Jim Harbaugh, the worse he gets. And so the best quarterback they've had to this point is still Jake Rudock, who was with Michigan for 1 year. Mm-hmm. And Cade McNamara was a returning starter, lost his job. J.J. McCarthy looked fantastic last year at times and was showing some things early this season. And now he is – the difference in numbers between him and Cade McNamara, like down the stretch from last year to this year, I'm sure aren't maybe McNamara threw more interceptions. I don't know, but you couldn't look at the box score, and even sometimes with the running game in terms of what McCarthy is rushing for at times. Like, if you take the names out of the box scores, would you know that one was playing and the other one wasn't?
No, not really. I don't think. I mean, McCarthy. I think the one thing that we have not seen from McCarthy recently that I do expect to see from him against Ohio State is running the ball more. It feels like that run game, the QB run game has just sort of not been a big part of their last few games. And that feels, because McCarthy had 7 carries for 18 yards. And that feels like something that, back in the Urban Meyer days at Ohio State, J.T. Barrett would run the ball 3 times against Rutgers and 2 times against Maryland and 5 times against Indiana. And then it would be the Penn State game or the Michigan game, and he would run it 18, 20 times. It feels like you're sort of setting up for that where, they have very intentionally not been putting J.J. McCarthy on film running the ball the last couple of weeks. And then you're sort of saving it up, and you're saving those hits on him. Because if he gets hurt, you're into a walk-on. Yeah, Davis Warren is the backup, and that's potentially not great. So you're saving the hits on him right now. You're saving the run, the running thing for him. I feel like that might be, at least enough of a twist that you're going to get a drive of, where J.J. McCarthy is going to pick up a 20-yard scramble. And you're going to have, and then Ohio State has to overly respect that. And then that turns into a handoff that gets you 10 yards, 15 yards. And you're probably getting a touchdown out of, one touchdown drive out of that QB run look and scheme. I don't know that they can do that the whole game. If you can't throw the ball downfield and stretch that defense, make that defense forced to respect you, deep, I think you're going to see a lot of that. Ohio State will line up 5 defensive backs just straight across the field, like 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. And, it's a coverage disguise, but also, if you're running the ball, you're going to have those guys crashing down pretty hard. And I don't, as long as the tackling is good, I don't know if that's going to be something they can just lean on the whole game as that QB run.
I think what you might also see is with that QB run and the QB scramble, that's where some of the deep shots can come with the route corrections and changing your routes and scramble drills and that sort of thing. Part of me thinks Jim Harbaugh should unleash J.J. McCarthy like 2004 Troy Smith. Just go be a playmaker, go run the ball, go throw it, get out on the move. He throws the ball really well on the run. If he's just standing back there and in the pocket and having to look over people, he's not as good. Throwing on the run where everybody's like running in the same direction and there's no defender between him and the receiver and he can just zip it. He's pretty good at that. And, Ronnie Bell, we've seen several of those throws downfield to Ronnie Bell on the run. I think if you allow him to become a playmaker, and it's a gamble because you do run the risk of turnovers, and he has fumbled. He is a fumbler at times. But I also think he's a playmaker and he's a gamer, and I think he has been playing with some shackles. But that's born out of seeing him in practice, but in practice, you're playing Michigan's offense against Michigan's defense, and it's like you're not really keeping score. Your offense, I think, needs to be better. It does need to be better than it was this past week against Illinois to beat Ohio State. And one way to do that, especially if Blake Corum is a little banged up, is to make J.J. McCarthy your number one playmaker. And if he gets beaten up and banged up, doesn't matter. If he comes out with a win, they will take it all day long. And if Davis Warren has to go play against Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, every single Wolverine will do it with a smile on their face.
Yeah, because speaking of games where you probably don't need to score a lot of points to win, a Big Ten championship game against Iowa. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. There's going to have to be, Jim Harbaugh is, if Blake Corum is not, well enough to look like Blake Corum, if he's compromised and, he's 75% and it's just like, oh, he just doesn't look right, and he's, all of a sudden those 4, 5, 6 yard gains are turning into 2 and 3 yard gains. You saw him getting tackled in the backfield a little bit on Saturday too, and you saw everybody else getting tackled in the backfield on Saturday as well. So there was a lot of C.J. Stokes and Isaiah Gash getting met a yard behind the line of scrimmage, which was very uncharacteristic for this year's Michigan run attack. If you're seeing that, Jim Harbaugh is going to have to go against all of his instincts right now, because you can tell just the way he's managing games. You can tell he doesn't trust J.J. McCarthy entirely. He trusts him to a point. It's like, all right, you can do this. Like, I'm going to give you the keys to the car, but you have to call me every 30 minutes, okay? And we have the little speed monitor thing in the car, and if you go over the speed limit, you're in trouble, mister. They don't entirely trust him, but you're going to have to, which is going to be very uncharacteristic for Jim Harbaugh, because he is a very conservative guy by nature. He wants to man-ball you. That is what he wants to do. If man-ball's not an option, you're going to have to just sort of lean on that offensive line to try and protect him, and just kind of say, like, well, go do the things that made you a 5-star. Go use those legs. Go get out on the edge. Go try and go. And that's going to involve some dangerous throws, because I don't know how much Michigan's receivers are going to be able to get separation, because this is not an elite speed separation wide receiver unit by any means. So that's going to involve some J.J. McCarthy throws into traffic. And is that going to be something that Jim Harbaugh is willing to take a risk on? Because it's, I have said before, I think there's like a 40% chance Michigan wins the game, a 40% chance Ohio State wins the game close, and a 20% chance Ohio State wins the game by multiple scores. And the way that happens is Michigan falls behind, they have to put the game on J.J. McCarthy, and you get, we have seen J.J. McCarthy make some, like, why would you make that throw into the end zone on first down? Like, just not good decision making from a young quarterback who's obviously still learning. There are throws you can get away with against an Illinois or against an Indiana that you can't get away with against an Ohio State. And, it feels like I don't know if Jim Harbaugh is going to be willing to sort of take the handcuffs off of J.J. McCarthy and say, either go win us or lose us the game, because we're not going to win it if we kind of keep trying to man-ball it if Blake Corum's not right.
Yeah, and we're still going to be talking about this all week, but as we wrap up, it'll be interesting to watch as Ohio State's defensive weakness is Michigan's defensive weakness. Mm-hmm. So it's like two sponges fighting each other, and nobody gets hurt and anything like that. So I guess whoever has the driest, crustiest sponge will win. So you got anything else?
Yeah, I did want to mention real quickly, boy, Michigan's defense looked real good in short yardage, didn't it? Like, it was like every time Illinois was in a 3rd and 1 or a 4th and 1, it was like, nope, that's not. That was a very, very impressive performance by the Michigan defensive front in those short yardage situations, which that's an area where Ohio State has struggled this year. And that's something that, I said, 40% chance or whatever that Michigan wins. It's, if Michigan is dominating Ohio State in short yardage and Ohio State can't convert those 3rd and 1s or 3rd and 2s, and you either end up kicking field goals or you get stopped on 4th and 1, that's where Michigan wins this game. It's, one of these teams is going to settle for a bunch of field goals in the red zone. We've seen Michigan do that a few times this year with Illinois and Michigan State. If Ohio State's kicking a bunch of field goals, that's how Michigan stays in the game and potentially wins it. But that you mentioned the sponge on sponge thing earlier. That is, Ohio State is a sponge and Michigan is a brick wall. That seems like that's going to be a real area of concern for Ohio State.
And knowing that Michigan doesn't tend to score or hasn't been scoring a bunch of points, Ryan Day will look at field goals and think, if I get field goals are good. Field goals are a winning proposition. So it may be playing right into Michigan's hands there and just keeping the game as close as possible. And then in the 4th quarter, it's anybody's ball game.
Yeah, and we have seen, a lot of the times when Ohio State has lost under Ryan Day, it has been the field goals. It has been, Clemson in the Fiesta Bowl. It was Ohio State completely dominates the first half of the game and keeps kicking field goals. And it was essentially the first half of the Penn State-Michigan game from this year, where Michigan completely dominates the first half, keeps kicking field goals, and has 2 stupid plays, and then it's 16-14 at halftime. It was the same thing for Ohio State and Clemson. The Oregon game last year, it was Ohio State on offense. They were going for it on 4th down, and they weren't converting it. And there's like this very certain pattern to the Ryan Day losses, and you have to be able to get points. You are going to have to score 7th. It's like whoever scores the highest percentage of touchdowns in the red zone, because I think teams are going to have similar numbers of red zone trips this upcoming week. Whoever scored touchdowns in the red zone is going to win that game.
Michigan, 4 field goals in the second half against Illinois. That's not going to be good enough this week. And, of course, like you said, Ohio State needs to get in the end zone more often than they don't. And it's been an up-and-down season in that regard for Ohio State. But we will be talking about this, like I said, for the rest of the week. So I think that we'll stop there. This is our Michigan Monday. We've got a Michigan Tuesday, we've got a Michigan Wednesday, we've got a Michigan Thursday, we've got a Michigan Friday, got a Michigan Saturday, and probably a Michigan Sunday.
We're going to be in Michigan on Monday.
I'm looking forward to that. An actual Michigan Monday.
Literally, a literal Michigan Monday. Yes, Tony and Kevin Noon and I from Buckeye Huddle heading up to Ann Arbor on Monday to cover the Jim Harbaugh press conference and do a little reporting from up there. So you can find all of that at BuckeyeHuddle.com and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Even if you're a Michigan fan, this would be a really good week. Like, just sign up for a monthly membership at BuckeyeHuddle.com. It is less than 50 cents a day. And, as we said off the top of the show, this might not be the last time these two teams play this year. So go ahead and sign up today at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And we should... We might be talking a little more Michigan than we typically do in the month of December.
Well, and I think the one thing I can say about us and Buckeye Huddle and in the show and what we do, like, we treat this rivalry with more respect than anybody else. And I don't toot our own horns, but I'm going to toot our own horns. We enjoy this rivalry, so we're going to give it all we got and give you all we've got. So look for us there, and I want to thank you all for joining us as always, and we'll talk to you guys later.